Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "The man who has seen the rising moon break out of the clouds at midnight has been present like an archangel at the creation of light and of the world." Hello once again, I'm Don Jackson, bathed in the light of a supermoon. 3 times this summer we have watched our familiar moon rise burning with an intensity that causes us to pause for a moment to look up. No wonder Emerson wrote of the experience as being present at the creation of light and the world. And is it any wonder then that our ancestors were filled with awe as it bathed the land in its light? Not as bright as our sun, of course, but with a magic all its own. Rupert Brooke wrote, "Rainbows and the blue bitter smoke of wood, and radiant raindrops couching in cool flowers, and flowers themselves that sway through the sunny hours, dreaming of moths that drink them under the moon." Yi Kyobo from Korea tried to catch the moonlight. A mountain monk coveted the moon. He drew water, a whole jar full, but when he reached his temple, he discovered that tilting the jar meant spilling the moon. Another echoed the same thoughts. "I scooped up the moon in my water bucket and spilled it on the grass." I refer you to the 2014 Old Farmer's Almanac for the month of August. The 10th brings the year's closest moon just 221,765 miles away. It is full in the hour of its closest approach, creating a large rising moon at sunset and higher than normal tides the next day. The Perseid meteor shower will be ruined by the light of this moon. End quote. You know, shooting stars on or around the 10th of August, St. Lawrence Day, are called the Tears of St. Lawrence. Every year at this time, when the Earth's orbit takes us through minuscule debris, what remains of the tail of the swift Tuttle comet from the late 1800s, I go out and try to see some of these tears for myself. I don't live far enough away from the influence of bright city lights for the best view, but I've still seen a few as they streak across the sky. This year, you might have to be really adventurous and stay up late enough until the moon has crossed far to the west. Psychiatrist Dr. Glenn Wilson, writing in the Daily Mail in 2003, said, "There's good reason to believe that people's personalities do change around the time of the full moon. Not because of any astronomical force, but because it creates the optimum lighting conditions for feeling carefree and mischievous. The light is dim enough to hide blemishes and reduce inhibitions, but not so dark that we fumble and stumble." End quote. I stood outside late in the night leading up to the supermoon and saw how strong its light was. The moonlight takes the edge off the landscape and gives it a softer look. Writer Mary E. Potter, writing in the Berkshire Eagle, reveals how the shadow can be a blessing in disguise. She said, "Moonlight softens our faults. All shabbiness dissolves into shadow." Long regarded as a mystical manifestation, dew appears even on clear nights, only to disappear in the early morning light. It has been called fairy pearls, Lady Moon's promise, the transformation of the previous night's discarded dreams and failed hopes, transformed by gentle lunar power into the seeds of new hope. Its connection with the moon inspired the French writer and soldier Cyrano de Bergerac when he produced his romance, A Trip to the Moon, in 1657. He claimed to have fastened small bottles filled with the dew to his body, to have been sucked up by the sun, and to have landed on the moon. Cannot promise you a lunar holiday with dew magic, but we can still use the magic of dew to lift our spirits and to raise our dreams to reality. End quote. An excerpt from A Complete Guide to Magic and Ritual by Cassandra Eason. Leonard Bernstein and the Infinite Variety of Music, published by Simon & Schuster, wrote, "We are still romantics at heart. The romantics gave us back our moon, for instance, which science has taken away from us and made into just another airport. Secretly, we all want the moon to be what it was before, a mysterious, hypnotic light in the sky. We want love to be mysterious too, as it used to be, and not a set of psychotherapeutic rules for interpersonal relationships. We crave mystery even as we forge ahead toward the solution of one cosmic mystery after another." End quote. On a night when everything seems to be magical because of the super moonlight, you might look to the water and see one of those mysteries revealed. Conrad Aiken, in Evening Song, wrote, "One by one in the moonlight there, neighing far off on the haunted air, the unicorns come down to the sea." Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who died in 1974, was the wife of Charles Lindbergh, the aviator. She, of course, knew tragedy in her life. After the death of her child, the Lindberghs lived in England for a time for protection and privacy. The war forced them to return to the States. In this chapter called Moonshell, in her bestseller Gift from the Sea, she writes, and I quote, "I walked far down the beach, soothed by the rhythm of the waves, the sun on my bare back and legs, the wind and mist from the spray on my hair. Into the waves and out like a sandpiper, and then home, drenched, drugged, reeling, full to the brim with my day alone, like the full moon before the night has taken a single nibble out of it, full as a cup poured up to the lip. Let no one come, I pray, in sudden panic. I might spill myself away." Is this then what happens to woman? She wants perpetually to spill herself away? All her instinct as a woman, the eternal nourisher of children, of men, of society, demands that she give. Her time, her energy, her creativeness drain out into these channels, if there is any chance, any leak. Traditionally, we are taught, and instinctively we long to give where it is needed, and immediately. Eternally, woman spills herself away in driblets to the thirsty, seldom being allowed the time, the quiet, the peace to let the pitcher fill up to the brim. Some lines later, she writes, and again I quote, "As far as the search for solitude is concerned, we live in a negative atmosphere, as invisible, as all-pervasive, and as enervating as high humidity on an August afternoon. The world today does not understand, in either man or woman, the need to be alone. How inexplicable it seems. Anything else will be accepted as a better excuse. If one sets aside time for a business appointment, a social engagement, or a shopping expedition, that time is accepted. But if one says, "I cannot come because that is my hour to be alone," one is considered rude, egotistical, or strange. What a commentary on our civilization when being alone is considered suspect. When one has to apologize for it, make excuses, hide the fact that one practices it like a secret vice. Actually, these are among the most important times in one's life when one is alone. Certain springs are tapped only when we are alone. The artist knows he must be alone to create, the writer to work out his thoughts, the musician to compose, the saint to pray. But women need solitude in order to find again the true essence of themselves, that firm strand which will be the indispensable center of a whole web of human relationships. She must find that inner stillness which Charles Morgan describes as the stilling of the soul within the activities of the mind and body, so that it might be still as the axis of a revolving wheel is still. Again, some lines later she writes, "It would not be an enormous project or a great work, but it should be something of one's own. Arranging a bowl of flowers in the morning can give a sense of quiet to a crowded day, like writing a poem or saying a prayer. What matters is that one be, for a time, inwardly attentive. Solitude, says the Moonshell." End quote. You know, there's so much more in this chapter. Some of it is a reflection of the time when it was written. It's a wonderful book written some decades back, but still with a message relevant in today's busy world. And like the inspiration of the Moonshell, the moon itself tells us to take a few moments to bathe in its light and come away refreshed. This was written by Richard N. Livingstone and first published in the New York Times on January the 12th, 1981. He writes, and I quote, "She came up to me after dinner, and I never told her how much I was hoping she would be there. We talked for a minute or two and then looked at old photographs where we all stood frozen in time with the long dresses and the baggy pants and the bright and eager eyes of the youngsters that we used to be. I asked her where she was living now and if she had any children, and she said no, just a husband and a cat. We agreed that it had been fun to see everyone from the old church group again, and then we said goodbye. She looked older now, of course, but in her face was the same girl I had seen in the moonlight so many years ago and remembered ever afterwards. That night we happened to leave the meeting together, and we walked up the driveway beside the church. We both agreed it was a beautiful night. Then she turned her face towards me, and I saw the moonlight reflected in her long black hair and thought how beautiful she was. I thought, too, that I must call and ask her out, but I never did. When I saw her now, I wanted to tell her how I had felt that night. But reunions are not the place to bring up such things. We go to them to see old friends, and we find that we are still inarticulate. We still, at age 50 or more, cannot bring ourselves to say, "I love you." We are sad, but not so much for the moment that has gone, for all the girls we shall never see again in the moonlight, and for all the times of our lives that have vanished, but for ourselves and all the words that waited for another time. Somewhere in the hills behind the hotel, there was a dance, and Rosemary listened to the music through the ghostly moonshine of her mosquito net, realizing that there was gaiety, too, somewhere about. An excerpt from Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Let's hope we meet no creature like the one the two characters met in American Werewolf in London. I loved all the classic moon music in the film, like Blue Moon and Moondance. But I wouldn't worry if the supermoon inspires you to go outside and howl once or twice in its strong glow. We planted a moonflower this year. It still has not bloomed, but I'm surprised the intense moonlight hasn't enticed the blossom to unfold. Edward Lear wrote, "They dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon. And hand in hand on the edge of the sand, they danced by the light of the moon." Robert Fulghum, in his Ivy Books' #1 bestseller, "It Was on Fire When I Lay Down on It," said, and I quote, "The moon is moving away from the earth at the rate of 2 inches a year because gravity is decreasing. This means that every year you weigh about 1 potato chip less than you weighed the year before. It's true, and that means the older you get, the softer you will hit the ground." End quote. He was writing about adults being silly enough to climb trees. This is a native North American legend about the great turtle. Catherine Komaroff, in the book Sky Gods, The Sun and Moon in Art and Myth, writes, "In the past, the world was dark because no one had been able to climb the dangerous path to the heavens to put light into the sky. Great Turtle, the master of all the animals, very much wanted to have some light. One day, Little Turtle, his devoted assistant, decided to try to climb the treacherous path. First, she climbed into a black, smoky storm cloud that carried her to the center of the sky. As she went, she collected lightning and gathered it into a great luminous ball. When she had finally gone as high as she could go, she threw the beautiful ball with all her might into the sky. As she rested from her difficult journey, Little Turtle looked at the sky and saw how lonely the glowing silver ball was, and she noticed that the sky was still too dark. She knew that her job was not yet finished, so she decided to collect another ball of lightning. She did this and threw it into the sky to join the first ball. The first became the moon, and the second the sun. Great Turtle was very pleased that Little Turtle had been so successful. Then he had another idea. He wanted the sun and moon to circle through the sky so that all the world should have light. He called upon his friends, the burrowing animals, to make holes in the corner of the sky, one in the east and the west. The sun and the moon lived like husband and wife, and one day they quarreled. The sun was angry at the moon for trying to pass through the hole in the sky before him. He was so furious that he forced the moon to disappear for a time into the dark world below. During that time, the world was very hot, and no one could rest or dream. The moon lost much of her light because of her great sorrow. She became so thin that she was only a sliver of her former self. Little Turtle felt great sympathy for her and mended the sad moon so that she could resume her circling the sky. The sun was very stubborn and refused to look at her as they passed each other, so she pined away again, and this has continued throughout time. The moon is full with hope and then slowly pines away in sorrow as the sun passes her by. smile that flickers on baby's lips when he sleeps. Does anybody know where it was born? There is a rumor that a young pale beam of a crescent moon touched the edge of a vanishing autumn cloud. And there, the smile was first born in the dream of a dew-washed morning. The smile that flickers on baby's lips when he sleeps. The words of Rabindranath Tagore. One final myth to close out this Super Moon webcast. This from the Time Life collection, The Enchanted World, the Book of Beginnings, and I quote, "In places as far apart as Lithuania and Tierra del Fuego, people once viewed the sun and the moon as husband and wife, and the stars as their children. According to some stories, their family life was almost exactly like that of human beings. Father-son was a distant figure. Some even said that he and the moon had quarreled, which is why they lived apart. Mother Moon raised the children alone, teaching them how to shine and polish the lamps they held up in the sky at night. But the stars, like real children, often rebelled as they grew older. One night, some of them decided not to take up their lamps. Instead, they turned somersaults and sang taunting verses, refusing to listen to their mother when she ordered them to return to their chores. The moon, however, was not a soft-hearted human mother, and she meted out heavy punishment. With barely a goodbye, she sent a wind to sweep them out of the heavens. Dropped onto the cold earth, the stars begged to be taken back. The pleas went unheeded until the next morning when the sun learned what had happened. He explained that the stars who fell to earth could never return, but he comforted his crying children by promising to let them brighten the earth as they had brightened the heavens. He changed them into dandelions, who turned their shining faces upward to watch their father's daily journey. But there are always a few in every field who turn into puffballs, trying in vain to fly back to their mother on the wind that brought them. Good night, sweet dreams, by the light of the moon. I'm Don Jackson.